The 42nd floor of the Kang Global Tower had a particular kind of silence, the kind that cost money. Floor-to-ceiling glass, precision-cut marble, a boardroom that smelled faintly of leather and ambition. Tiana Sampson had worked in that silence for 4 years. She knew the rhythm of it, the way the ventilation hummed at exactly 68 degrees, the way afternoon lights stretched across the conference table at 3:15 p.m. and made everything look golden and important. The way men in $1,000 suits said nothing of substance and still somehow commanded every room. She was the director of strategic operations, 31 years old. The woman who made sure the quarterly projections landed on time, that the Tokyo partnership didn't collapse over a translation error, that the Singapore deal closed 3 weeks ahead of schedule because she had noticed the clause nobody else caught. She was also, in the language of this building, invisible. Not literally. People saw her. They sent her emails. They needed things from her constantly. But there is a difference between being needed and being seen, and Tiana had learned to live inside that gap with a kind of quiet, dignified grief. The boardroom was filling up for the pre-summit review. Analysts, department heads, a few junior executives who still had something to prove. Tiana was already seated at the far end of the table, her notes color-coded, her laptop open, her coffee untouched because it had gone cold while she was adjusting the presentation for the 3rd time. Then Kang Jun-ho walked in. The room changed when he entered. It always did. He was 37, with the kind of controlled, quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself, the straight back, the measured stride, the dark eyes that moved across a room like he was calculating everything in it. He wore charcoal gray today, no tie, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. He was the CEO of Kang Global. He had been for 6 years. And in those 6 years, Tiana had watched him build something remarkable, not just a company, but an empire while she quietly ensured the architecture beneath it didn't collapse. He sat at the head of the table without looking at her. He rarely looked directly at her unless there was a problem to solve. That was their dynamic. She provided competence, he provided direction. Clean, professional, uncomplicated. Or so she had told herself. The meeting was routine until it wasn't. 30 minutes in, Marcus Shin, one of the senior analysts, a man with a laugh too loud for his rank, leaned toward Jun-ho during a brief recess and said something low enough that it wasn't meant to carry. But the room had good acoustics. Tiana had always known that. The catering staff had brought a tray of refreshments, and a woman, young, conventionally striking, the kind of symmetry that people called beautiful without thinking too hard about it, had arrived to set them down near the head of the table. Marcus watched her leave, then turned back to Jun-ho with a grin. Now, that's more your type, right? Director-level attention without the director personality. Jun-ho gave a short, dismissive sound, not quite a laugh. And then he said it. Yeah, Tiana's competent, but she's not exactly someone you look at twice. He said it the way people say things they believe are obvious, casually, without weight, the way you'd comment on weather. Tiana did not react. That was the thing about her. She had trained herself, over years and years, to receive pain without flinching. She looked down at her notes. She clicked her pen once. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and the meeting resumed. And nobody noticed anything had changed, but everything had changed. She's not exactly someone you look at twice. The words sat in the center of her chest like a stone. Not because they were new, she had suspected, in the particular way that smart women suspect things they don't want to be true. But hearing it confirmed, casually, carelessly, in that room she had poured 4 years into, that was something else entirely. She finished the meeting. She shook 2 hands. She collected her laptop and her cold coffee, and she walked, with perfect posture, to the elevator. And when the doors closed and she was finally alone, she pressed her back against the mirrored wall and closed her eyes. She did not cry. She never cried at work. But she made a decision, there in that quiet metal box between floors, that would change the shape of everything that followed. She was going to stop giving herself away for free. The next morning, Tiana arrived at the office 8 minutes later than usual. 8 minutes. Nobody noticed. But Tiana noticed. She had spent 4 years arriving early enough to have the coffee hot and the morning briefing organized by the time anyone else walked in. 8 minutes was a statement she was making to no one but herself. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had 3 unread messages from Jun-ho, all sent before 7 a.m., because he was always the first one thinking and he had gotten accustomed to her being the second. She read them. She responded concisely, professionally, completely, and then she closed the thread and opened a different folder. The folder was titled simply, Next. Inside it were 18 months of work. Business plan drafts, market research, brand concept documents, financial projections, the private architecture of a dream she had been building in the margins of her real life, a creative agency focused on brand strategy for Black-owned businesses. Something that was entirely, irreducibly hers. She had been planning to wait, to save a little more, to get the timing right. She was always waiting for the timing to be right. She closed the folder and went back to work. But something had shifted, like a key turned in a lock, deep and quiet, somewhere inside her. Over the following week, the change was subtle enough that most people couldn't name it. Tiana was still there, still professional, still delivering. But the warmth she had always brought to the office, the small human touches that nobody acknowledged but everyone benefited from, began to recede. She stopped staying late to finalize things Jun-ho hadn't asked for yet. She stopped anticipating his needs 2 steps ahead. She stopped pausing outside his office door to see if he was running behind schedule. She stopped being a radiator and started being a thermostat responsive to what was required, nothing more. The first person to notice was Priya, one of the junior analysts who sat near Tiana's office. "You okay?" she asked on Thursday afternoon, leaning into the doorframe. "I'm great," Tiana said, and she smiled, and it was a real smile, just slightly narrower than usual. "Why?" "You just seem, I don't know, quieter." "I'm always quiet." "Yeah, but it's a different quiet." Tiana looked at her for a moment. Then she said, gently, "I'm good, Priya. I'm just thinking." She was thinking about a great many things. She was thinking about the women she had watched Jun-ho admire from a distance. Over the years, women who were striking in the way the industry rewarded, who wore their desirability like a credential. She was thinking about how she had never once tried to compete with that. Not because she lacked confidence, but because she had believed, somewhere quiet in her chest, that what she offered was different, deeper, more durable. She was thinking about how wrong she had been to let that belief live without testing it, and she was thinking, with increasing clarity, about the next folder on her laptop, and what it would feel like to walk toward it instead of away. Jun-ho noticed nothing for the first 4 days. He was in the middle of the Meridian acquisition, and his attention was compressed to a single point, the way it always was during critical deal windows. He moved through the office like a weather system in tents, self-contained, expecting the infrastructure around him to simply work. The infrastructure did work. Tiana made sure of that. But the infrastructure had stopped being warm. It was Friday afternoon when the first small crack appeared in his certainty. He had a car that arrived at 6:30 p.m. to take him home. On most evenings, he and Tiana had fallen into the habit, not by any formal arrangement, just by the accretion of routine of riding down in the elevator together, and often talking for another 10 minutes at the building entrance, about whatever was still unresolved. It was the most honest part of their professional relationship. Day's end conversations, defenses lowered slightly, thinking out loud. At 6:28 p.m., he stepped off the elevator into the lobby and looked around. She wasn't there. He checked his phone. No message from her. He looked back toward the elevator bank, some instinct making him wait an extra 90 seconds that he couldn't fully account for. Nothing. He got in his car. He spent the drive reviewing the Meridian documents. He did not think about Tiana again, but on Monday, when he went to send her a question at 7:02 a.m. and didn't receive a response until 8:47 a.m., he felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not annoyance exactly, more like a small, unexplained absence. The way you notice a song has stopped playing only after the silence has settled in. he chalked it up to her being busy. She was always busy. By Wednesday, the pattern had repeated itself enough times that he started paying attention in a different way. Tiana was still delivering. Her work was, as always, immaculate. But when he walked past her office, she didn't look up. When he said her name in a meeting, she responded but didn't hold the conversation open the way she usually did. When he made a dry comment at the end of a briefing, the kind of dry comment she was the only one who ever actually caught, she gave a polite, closed smile and looked back at her notes. He found himself standing in the doorway of his own office at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, looking toward her end of the floor and wondering when exactly the temperature had dropped. He told himself it was nothing. People had off weeks. Tiana was human. He didn't examine the thought further because examining it would have required him to ask why it mattered, and he wasn't ready for that question. The Meridian expansion required a 10-day summit in Tokyo. Jun-ho had always handled these trips with a small, trusted team, his CFO, his head of legal, and Tiana, who managed the operational architecture of every major deal with the kind of precision that made everything look effortless. She confirmed her attendance via email. Professionally, completely. With none of the small anticipatory energy she had once brought to international trips, the way she used to mention good restaurants she'd read about, or send him an article about a neighborhood gallery, or note that the weather that week was supposed to be good for walking. Just confirmed. I'll have the brief prepared for departure. They flew business class on separate sides of the cabin. Tiana wore wireless headphones for most of the flight and read something on her tablet with the focused, private absorption of someone who had decided to use every available hour for herself. Jun-ho watched her once from across the aisle, just a glance, and she didn't notice. Or if she did, she gave no indication. The hotel was exceptional. 41st floor, Minato District, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city's luminous sprawl. They had separate rooms. They always had separate rooms. But on previous trips, there had been a fluidity to the evenings. Late dinners that ran long, lobby conversations, a general ease between them that made the professional travel feel almost pleasant. This trip, Tiana was perfectly cordial and entirely unavailable. She attended every meeting with the precision of someone who had memorized the room in advance, which she had. She fielded questions in English and Japanese with equal composure. She identified a critical structural issue in the licensing agreement on day 2 that saved the entire deal from a complication the legal team had missed. And she did it so quietly that Jun-ho only understood what had happened an hour later when his general counsel called him to explain. He went to find her afterward. She was at the hotel bar, not drinking, but on her laptop, earbuds in one ear, writing what looked like personal notes, not work documents. Something else, with a different energy in her posture. More alive than he'd seen from her in weeks. He sat across from her without asking. She looked up, took out the earbud, waited. "Good catch today," he said. "Thank you." A pause. In previous trips, this pause would have filled naturally with conversation. She would have had something ready, some observation or question that pulled the evening open. Now she simply looked at him with a polite, expectant expression, as if waiting for him to state his purpose. "What are you working on?" he asked, nodding at her laptop. She closed the screen slightly, not all the way, just enough. "Personal project. Something for the office?" No. The brevity of it was disorienting. He was used to being the one who gave short answers. "You want to get dinner?" he asked. "There's a place on the 3rd floor that Nakamura-san recommended." "I've already eaten," she said, "but thank you." She put the earbud back in. Not rudely, not performatively, just back to work, back to herself. He sat there for another moment, because leaving immediately felt like acknowledging something he didn't have language for yet. Then he got up, said goodnight to the top of her head, and walked to the elevator. In his room, 41 floors above the glittering city, he stood at the window for a long time. He told himself he was thinking about Meridian. He wasn't thinking about Meridian. It happened on day 5, a small thing. The kind of thing you don't realize you've been watching until you catch yourself watching it. The team had an early morning meeting, 7 a.m. in one of the hotel's smaller conference rooms. Jun-ho arrived first. Tiana arrived at 6:58, which was exactly like her, never early enough to seem eager, never late enough to seem careless. She was wearing a deep rust orange wrap dress he hadn't seen before, and her natural hair was out today, full and soft, different from her usual office style. She was carrying a ceramic mug of tea she must have picked up from the lounge downstairs. She sat, arranged her materials, and immediately got to work reviewing her notes, completely unaware that he was looking at her, or choosing to appear that way. And Jun-ho, for the first time in 4 years, actually looked, not in the assessing, cataloging way he was accustomed to looking at women, in a slower way. The way you look at something that's always been in your peripheral vision and suddenly resolves into focus. The particular grace she had unhurried, self-possessed. The way she held her pen loosely, thinking, sometimes tapping her lip once before writing something down. The small crease between her brows when she was concentrating. The precise, considered way she formed her sentences in meetings, never wasting a word. He thought, with a startling clarity, when did she get so beautiful? And then, almost immediately, she was always beautiful. The thought arrived with the force of something true and long delayed, and it was immediately followed by a cold, uncomfortable second thought that he pushed to the side before it could fully form. The meeting began. He paid attention to it. He was good at compartmentalizing. But that evening at the group dinner, the whole team, plus 2 executives from the Tokyo partner firm, something else happened that he wasn't prepared for. Kenji Toda was 34, handsome in an easy, relaxed way, fluent in English with a warmth that rooms responded to. He was their Tokyo liaison. And from the moment they sat down, he directed a quiet, consistent attention toward Tiana that Jun-ho clocked immediately and couldn't stop tracking. Toda asked her about her work. She answered. He followed up with a real question, the kind that showed he'd actually listened to her first answer. She laughed at something he said, a real laugh, not the professional courtesy laugh, the full one that changed her whole face, and Jun-ho felt something tighten in his chest that he had absolutely no right to feel. He watched Toda lean slightly toward her, watched her engage, animated, more present than she'd been all week. Watched Toda write something on a business card, his personal cell. Jun-ho would have bet his entire company on it and slid it across the table to her. She took it. She smiled. She put it in the front pocket of her blazer. Jun-ho asked his CFO a question about the Meridian timeline that didn't need asking, just to give himself somewhere to put his eyes. The next morning's debrief was meant to be clean and brief. An hour, maybe 90 minutes. Go through the partnership terms, align on the implementation timeline, confirm next steps. Toda joined them for the first 45 minutes. He sat across from Tiana, and the dynamic between them was professionally appropriate but warm, notably warm, the way people are when there's been an evening that counted as something. Halfway through the session, Tiana made a suggestion about restructuring the phasing of the implementation plan. It was a good suggestion. It was, objectively, an excellent suggestion. She laid it out clearly, walked through the logic, answered questions from the legal team without hesitation. Toda was nodding before she finished. That's a significantly better structure, he said. I'd like to adapt this for our side as well, if Kang-san agrees. He looked at Jun-ho. Everyone looked at Jun-ho. Jun-ho, who had been listening with the particular tight attention of a man trying very hard to appear neutral, said, "We can discuss the phasing after this session." Tiana blinked once. It was a non-answer, and she knew it. The room knew it. The suggestion was sound. He had no actual objection, but something in him had stiffened at watching Toda be the first to validate her. After the meeting, when the room had cleared, she gathered her things quickly. He stepped into her path, not blocking, just present. "The phasing idea," he said. "It's good. We'll use it." She looked at him. Her expression was even unreadable. "Thank you." Toda seemed to think highly of it. "A beat. He's perceptive," she said, and then she walked past him, pulling her bag over her shoulder. and left him standing in the empty conference room with the particular discomfort of a man who knows he's behaving badly and can't fully explain why. On day 8, the deal was signed. There was a celebratory dinner, and afterward, the team dispersed in different directions, the CFO and legal counsel heading to one of the hotel bars, Toda taking his team to Roppongi, and Jun-ho and Tiana somehow ending up outside, alone, at a quiet ramen shop 2 blocks from the hotel that she had found in a travel magazine she'd been reading on the plane. It hadn't been planned. She'd been heading there alone. He had fallen into step beside her without quite deciding to. She'd looked at him sideways, but hadn't told him to go back. The place was tiny, 8 seats at a wooden counter, an older couple running it. The air thick with dashi and the quiet intimacy of a space that didn't accommodate performance. There was no being impressive here. There was only the food and the noise of the city outside and the way the steam rose from their bowls in slow, unhurried columns. For the first 20 minutes, they ate in silence. Not uncomfortable silence. The old kind, the kind that had once existed between them easily, the kind that said we know each other well enough not to fill every second. Then she said, looking at her bowl, "Do you remember the first time we almost lost the Harlow account?" He almost smiled. "The Cancun miscommunication. You told the client we'd have a full operational framework in 30 days. I said approximately 30 days. You said 30 days. It was approximately 30. It was 52, and I had to rebuild the entire timeline from scratch in a weekend." He did laugh, then short, genuine, the rare kind. "You made it look like the plan was always 52 days. I made it look like the plan had always been perfect," she corrected, which it was, after the weekend. He looked at her across the narrow counter. There was something open in her face right now, something that the past few weeks had closed off, the warmth that was native to her, that she had been so carefully rationing. "You've been different lately," he said. The warmth didn't disappear exactly, but it steadied. She picked up her chopsticks. Different how? Farther away. She chewed, swallowed, considered. Then, people change. Things shift. Did I do something? She looked at him then, and something passed across her face too fast to catch. "No," she said. "You were exactly yourself." He didn't know what to do with that answer. It sounded like a compliment and felt like a wound. They finished their ramen. They walked back through the Tokyo night side by side, close enough that their sleeves occasionally touched on the narrow sidewalk, and she told him about a temple she'd visited alone on her free afternoon, and he found himself asking questions he actually wanted the answers to. By the time they reached the hotel, something between them had thawed enough to feel almost like what it used to be. Almost. In the elevator, she pressed her floor button and then looked straight ahead at the closing doors. He looked at the side of her face, the clean lines of it, her quiet self-containment, and felt, for the first time, the full weight of what he had been taking for granted. She stepped off at her floor without looking back. The elevator doors closed on the corridor behind her, and he rode the last 8 floors to his room alone. And he couldn't quite remember the last time he had felt something so close to lonely. They came back from Tokyo on a Tuesday. By Friday, Jun-ho had reached a conclusion that his usual defense mechanisms were poorly equipped to handle. He was in love with Tiana Sampson, and he had possibly been in love with her for years. And he had no idea what to do about it. He was not a man who was comfortable with uncertainty. He ran a multi-billion-dollar company on the strength of his ability to assess situations clearly and act decisively. Emotional ambiguity was not a condition he had much practice tolerating. So, he did what he did with business problems. He decided to resolve it. He went to her office late on Friday. She was still at her desk. Of course, she had always been dedicated. Even now. Even in her withdrawal. She had her reading glasses on, which she only wore when she thought no one was watching. She took them off when she heard him at the door. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. He had planned this, organized his thoughts, which was perhaps the problem. It came out with an executive precision that the moment didn't deserve. "Something has been true for me for a while, and I haven't acknowledged it appropriately." I think you matter to me in a way that goes beyond professional. I'd like to understand if that's something you'd be open to exploring." He watched her face as he said it. He saw something move across it, not the warmth he'd hoped for, not surprise, not softness, something older and more considered. She was very still for a moment. Then, "I need you to tell me something honestly." "Of course." 3 weeks ago. The boardroom. The catering break. She paused. "The conference room has good acoustics, Jun-ho. I've always known that." The silence that followed was the longest of his professional life. He understood immediately. He understood completely. And watching understanding move across his face, she nodded once a small confirmation and continued. "You said I was competent, which is true. And you said I wasn't someone you looked at twice." She said it without drama, without accusation, with the quiet precision of someone reading a diagnosis. "And now, 3 weeks later, something shifted for you. I need you to understand why I can't simply receive that as a gift." He opened his mouth. Closed it. "I'm not asking you to feel bad," she continued. "I'm asking you to understand the position you're putting me in. You've had 4 years to look at me twice. Something changed me pulling back, Toda paying attention to me at dinner, and now suddenly here you are." She tilted her head slightly. "Is this about me? Or is this about the version of me you only noticed when you thought you might be losing her?" It was the most direct she had ever been with him. The most direct she had ever been with anyone in this building. And it cost her something to say it. He could see that in the slight tension in her jaw, the way her hands were folded carefully on the desk, but she said it anyway, because she had decided to stop being careful on everyone else's behalf. "I don't have an answer for that," he said finally, and it was the most honest thing he'd said in a long time. "I know," she said. "That's the problem." The next week, Tiana submitted her notice. It arrived in Jun-ho's inbox on a Monday morning, standard format, 30 days notice, warm but final in the way professional goodbyes always are. It listed her last date. It offered to ensure a thorough transition. It thanked the company for the opportunity. It did not explain. He read it 4 times. Then he called his assistant and said he needed 20 minutes cleared from the morning. Then he sat in his office chair and looked out at the city for 15 of those minutes without doing anything at all. Priya knocked on his office door in the afternoon, which was unusual. She normally went through channels. He let her in. "She's leaving," Priya said, without preamble. "I know. She's launching her own agency. I've seen her working on it for months. It's remarkable. Honestly, the concept, the clients she's already lined up, everything." A pause. "She's been ready for a long time." He said nothing. "I thought you should know that she's not leaving because she's unhappy," Priya continued, carefully. "She's leaving because she's finally choosing to be happy. There's a difference." After Priya left, he opened Tiana's personnel file not to look at her resume, but to look at her performance reviews. 4 years of them. 4 years of exceptional, outstanding, critical to operations, the standard others are measured against. He thought about what she had said. "You've had 4 years to look at me twice." He thought about the catering break and the casual cruelty of how he had spoken, and the way she had never, not once, shown him that she heard it, had just quietly absorbed it and begun, without dramatics or demands, the process of reclaiming herself. He found himself thinking about his own motivations with the brutal honesty of someone who had been asked the right question at exactly the right time. Toda. The dinner. The business card going into her pocket. The way she had laughed the real laugh at something someone else said. Was it ego? Was it genuine? He sat with the question for a long time, because she deserved him sitting with it rather than rushing past it toward a resolution that was convenient for him. By Thursday, he had his answer. It didn't make him feel better, exactly, but it made him feel clear. Her last day was a Friday in November. The team did what teams do, a small gathering, a card, a gift she would genuinely use. She hugged people. She was gracious and warm and genuinely moved, because she loved these people even as she was leaving them. Jun-ho came by at the end of the afternoon, when the office had mostly cleared. She was packing the last of her things, a small succulent she'd had on her desk for 3 years, a few framed photos. "Congratulations on the agency," he said. It was the first they'd spoken since the Friday conversation. She looked up. "Thank you. The concept is strong. The market positioning is smart." He paused. "You'll be excellent." "I know," she said, not arrogantly. "Just, certainly." She picked up the last box. He stepped forward instinctively to help, and she let him take it just that much, just the box, and they rode the elevator down together one final time. In the lobby, she took the box back. She thanked him again, professionally, warmly, with the particular kind of grace that people show when they've chosen their own peace over someone else's comfort. And then she walked out through the glass doors into the November afternoon, and the doors closed behind her, and she did not look back. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Jun-ho's career. Objectively, nothing went wrong. Her replacement was competent. The Meridian integration moved forward. The company did not collapse without Tiana Sampson, but the quality of everything changed in a way that was almost impossible to articulate. Operations were fine. The work was fine. The office was fine. It was fine in the flat, gray way that things are fine when what made them good is no longer present. He noticed her absence the way you notice a missing tooth, constantly, involuntarily. In the small moments when you turn to reach for something that is no longer there, the morning briefings that used to have a particular energy, the end of day, when the elevator no longer held the possibility of a 10-minute conversation about something real. The meetings where no one caught his dry remarks. His assistant, a careful, perceptive woman named Ji-yun, told him after 3 weeks that he seemed distracted. He told her he was fine. She did not press. But she sent him a link to the Sampson Creative Agency's website, which had just launched, with a message that said only, "Thought you'd want to see this." He looked at it for a long time. It was beautiful, clean, intentional, warm. The brand concept work was extraordinarily rich, culturally specific, full of genuine pride in the businesses she was supporting. The testimonials from her first 3 clients were the kind of thing people wrote when they felt genuinely seen. There was a photo of her on the About page, and in it she was smiling in a way he had almost never seen at Kang Global, like someone who had arrived somewhere they had chosen for themselves. He closed his laptop. He sat in the quiet of his office, which had never felt as large and empty as it did right now, and he made a decision. He found her on a Saturday morning, which was deliberate, not at the office, not in any professional context, but in the space she had built for herself. Sampson Creative had a small studio in Greenpoint, above a design shop, with large windows and exposed brick walls, and the kind of light that seemed chosen rather than accidental. He had called Priya, who had hesitated, then given him the address with the quiet hopefulness of someone who was rooting for a particular outcome. Tiana opened the door in paint-stained overalls and a cream sweatshirt. Her hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked, in that moment, more herself than he had ever seen her. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let him in without saying anything, which he took as the gift it was. The studio was warm and alive, mood boards on the walls, client samples spread across a long work table, 2 plants that were thriving, a speaker in the corner playing something low and jazzy. It smelled like coffee and wood smoke and possibility. "I don't have a prepared speech," he said. And it was true, he had thought about what to say for 2 weeks and had come no closer to anything that felt adequate. "I just have the truth." She sat on the edge of her desk and crossed her arms, not defensively, just settling in, listening. "What I said in that boardroom was wrong," he began. "Not just unkind, wrong. As a factual matter and as a reflection of how I actually feel, it was wrong. And you heard it, and you never said a word, and I didn't even notice I'd hurt you. And that's the part I've had to sit with the longest." She watched him. Her expression was quiet, giving him nothing but her attention. "I asked myself if this was ego. I asked myself honestly, because you deserved me asking honestly. And the answer is some of it, at first, probably was, Toda, you pulling away. The familiar instinct of a man who realizes he's about to lose something and reacts before he understands why. He paused. She didn't fill the silence, but I kept asking the question even after the ego part settled. And what's underneath it is you. Just you. The way you hold your pen when you're thinking. The way you caught the Harlow timeline and rebuilt it over one weekend and never asked for credit. The way you laughed in Tokyo at that dinner, the real laugh, and I felt it like something I'd been missing without knowing what it was. His voice was quieter now. Stripped of the boardroom precision, down to something harder and more honest. I was careless with you for 4 years, and I called it professionalism and distance and whatever else made it comfortable. And I was wrong. He looked directly at her. I was blind, and I hurt you. And you deserved better than what I gave you in that building every single day. The room was very quiet. The jazz played on, low and indifferent. Tiana looked at him for a long time, not to make him uncomfortable, but because she was genuinely assessing what she saw. Whether the man in front of her matched the words coming out of him. I believe you mean that, she said. Finally. I do. Meaning it isn't enough by itself. I know. She slid off the desk and walked to the window. Outside, Greenpoint was alive with Saturday morning the farmer's market 2 blocks down, the sound of a delivery truck, someone's kid on a bicycle. She had chosen this neighborhood deliberately. She had chosen this office deliberately. She had chosen this entire chapter of her life deliberately. That was new. That was everything. I'm not the same woman I was at Kang Global, she said, not accusingly. As orientation. The version of me that was always available, always accommodating, always just grateful to be in the room. I don't live there anymore. I know. This agency is mine. This work is mine. It comes first, not because I'm punishing you or protecting myself, but because I spent 4 years making other people's visions happen, and now I'm making mine happen, and that is not negotiable. It shouldn't be, he said. She turned from the window and looked at him. I'm not easy, she said. I mean that. I have a specific life. I have a schedule and priorities, and a board I answer to now, and clients who depend on me. I'm not going to rearrange all of that because someone decided he wanted me. I'm not asking you to. Good, she studied him. And I'm not going to move fast. If something grows between us, it grows at its own pace. No performing. No making you feel better about your past mistakes by immediately forgiving everything. That's not how this works. I understand. Do you? She tilted her head. Because what I'm describing is slow and unglamorous, and it means you actually show up without an audience and without applause. He met her eyes. Tell me what showing up looks like to you. It was the right question, the only question. And she knew it was the right question, which meant she had to give it a real answer. It looks like consistency, she said slowly. Not grand gestures. Consistency. It looks like knowing what I'm working on and caring about it because it matters to me, not because it impresses you. It looks like being present when I've had a hard day, even when I don't ask for it. She paused. And it looks like never, not once, making me feel invisible again. The last one landed differently. He absorbed it. I can do that, he said. You'll have to prove it, she said. Not in words. I know. She looked at him for another long moment. And then something in her loosened, not surrender. Nothing like surrender. More like the cautious opening of a door to see what the light looked like on the other side. There's coffee, she said finally. If you want to sit for a while. He did. He was not naturally a patient man. Everyone who had ever worked for him knew this. But patience, he discovered, was less about temperament and more about what you were willing to do for something that mattered. And so he learned. He started small, because she had asked for consistency and not spectacle. He texted her on a Tuesday night, not about business, just something he'd read that reminded him of a conversation they'd had in Tokyo about design and intention. She texted back an hour later. Brief, warm enough. He did not push. A week later, he went to the opening of a gallery show, a young black sculptor whose work Tiana had mentioned once, weeks ago, in the context of something else entirely. He sent her a photo of his favorite piece with no explanation. She responded with a string of information about the artist that revealed she knew this work deeply, had been following this person for years. He asked questions. She answered them. The conversation lasted 2 hours. He began to pay attention to things he had previously processed as background. The challenges she mentioned in passing a difficult client, a cash flow timing issue, a pitch that wasn't landing. He thought about them when she wasn't in the room. Sometimes he sent resources, a contact, an article, something practical and useful. He was careful not to try to solve her problems, because she hadn't asked him to solve her problems. He was just present in the way that people are present when they're paying attention. She noticed. She didn't say she noticed, but she began to text first sometimes. She began to call on Sunday evenings, which became a quiet rhythm. An hour, sometimes 2, both of them at home, talking about work and ideas and nothing in particular. 6 weeks after the Greenpoint visit, she asked him if he wanted to come to a client presentation she was doing on Thursday. Not to help, not to advise, just to watch. He rearranged 4 hours of his schedule without telling her he had to. The presentation was remarkable. She commanded the room with a confidence that was entirely different from the quiet competence he'd seen at Kang Global. This was expressive, specific, joyful. She clearly loved this work. The clients, a husband and wife team running a small food brand, leaned forward in their chairs and kept interrupting to say yes. By the end, the wife was tearing up slightly, which was not something Jun-ho had ever witnessed in a brand strategy presentation before. Afterward, outside the building, he said, "That was extraordinary, Tiana." She squinted at him slightly, reading him for sincerity. She found it. "Thank you," she said, and then, "It's what I was always meant to do. I just took a while to get here. You're here now." She looked at him for a moment, warm, measuring, something opening further. Then she said, "Do you want to get dinner?" He did. It was not a single moment. That's the thing nobody tells you about love, that's actually real. It doesn't arrive in a flash. It accumulates. It builds in the spaces between grand gestures, in the morning texts and the Sunday calls, and the way someone shows up for your ordinary Tuesday. Sampson Creative landed its first major contract in April, a national campaign for a Black-owned personal care brand that had been trying to break into mainstream retail. The pitch had taken 3 months. The preparation had consumed Tiana in the particular consuming way that meaningful work does, and Jun-ho had watched from the appropriate distance, asking questions when invited, staying quiet when not, being present in the way she had defined it, consistent, attentive, not controlling. When she called him at 7:43 p.m. on a Thursday to tell him they'd won the contract, he was still in his own office, and he stayed on the phone for 40 minutes listening to her describe every detail of how it had happened, the room, the moment the clients exchanged a look, the drive home after, and he asked questions, real ones, and she talked. And the joy in her voice was the most beautiful sound he had heard in a long time. He sent flowers the next morning, not a massive arrangement, because that would have been performative, but one beautifully chosen bunch of proteas and greenery that looked like something that belonged in her studio. The card said only, "You built this." I was watching. She called him 10 minutes after they were delivered. He could hear her smiling. "Come to dinner tonight," she said. "My place. I'm cooking." "Okay, actually cook. Not your assistant ordering something and pretending. I know how to cook. I've never seen evidence of this." "Then tonight you will." Her apartment was warm and easy in the Blash way that people's homes are when they have been genuinely inhabited, things on the walls that meant something, books stacked on surfaces, a kitchen that showed signs of being actually used. He made a simple jjigae, the kind his mother had made on cold evenings, and she stood at the counter while he cooked and told him about the campaign timeline. And at some point the conversation stopped being about work and became about other things, childhood and failure, and what it felt like to finally want something openly instead of quietly. At the table, halfway through the meal, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen directed at him before. "I didn't think you were capable of this," she said. "Of cooking?" "Of." She searched for the word. Tenderness, without strategy. He set down his spoon. "I think I was always capable of it. I just needed to stop being the most important person in every room first. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand briefly, just a brush of her fingers, and pulled back. It was the smallest thing. It was everything. "Don't mess this up," she said, and she was smiling when she said it. "I won't," he said. He meant it in the only way it mattered, not as a promise of perfection, but as a commitment to trying correctly, again and again, for as long as she let him. The event was held in a restored warehouse in Brooklyn, and it had been designed the way all of Sampson Creative's events were designed, with intention, with warmth, with the specific, irreducible quality of work that came from someone who understood that aesthetics are a form of care. 2 years, 4 full-time employees, 11 major clients, and 1 industry recognition award later, the Sampson Creative Anniversary celebration was exactly the kind of room that Tiana had always been capable of building. She had just needed the space, and the time, and the decision to build it for herself. She stood near the windows with a glass of sparkling water, watching her team move through the room with the ease of people who believed in what they were doing. Priya was there. She had left Kang Global 6 months ago to join Sampson Creative as head of client relations, which Tiana had not asked for but had welcomed. The clients were there, animated, grateful, real. There was music and light, and the particular energy of a room full of people who felt correctly seen. Jun-ho found her by the windows. He was not in a suit tonight. She had specifically told him not to be, and he had listened, which was still sometimes surprising to her, the degree to which he had learned to listen. He wore dark trousers and a simple black shirt, and he looked like a man who had learned something important about what rooms he actually belonged in. He stood beside her, not in front of her, and looked out at what she had made. 2 years, he said. 2 years, she agreed. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it naturally, without ceremony, the way people hold hands when it is simply the correct continuation of being next to someone. His thumb moved across her knuckles, and she felt, in that small motion, the whole of what these 2 years had been, slow and honest and real. "I thought of something today," he said. "Tell me." "I said you weren't someone people looked at twice." His voice was low, private, carrying nothing but honesty. "And I want you to know that I look at you every day. I've been looking at you for 2 years. I don't think I know how to stop." She turned and looked at him fully, the dark eyes, the line of his jaw, the man who had had to learn painstakingly and without shortcuts that the things worth having are the things you earn. She had watched him learn it. She had not made it easy, because it was not supposed to be easy, and she had no regret about that. She had a life that was entirely her own, work that woke her up in the morning, a dream she had chosen and was living. And beside that, not instead of it, not diminishing it, but genuinely beside it this. "I know," she said, and she smiled, and it was the real one, the full one, the one that changed everything, and she squeezed his hand once. Across the room, the client with the food brand, the one whose wife had cried at the pitch, raised a glass in her direction. She raised hers back. Around her, the room was warm and bright and entirely hers. Outside, the city did what it always did, moved forward, indifferent and electric, full of people building their next chapters. Tiana Sampson had already built hers, and she had never looked better. She had a life that was entirely her own. And beside that, not instead of it, but genuinely beside it this. That was the whole story. That was the only ending that was true.